I'm Andrew Shapiro from Broadscale Group, and we really have a terrific group of folks here to talk about smart cities, and particularly the technology, Internet of Things that's driving change as it relates to energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, water, waste. It implicates areas including housing, transportation, infrastructure, and has the potential to solve some of the biggest problems in cities: pollution, congestion, affordability. So we want to jump right into this. We've got a great group of folks here. This opportunity is a big one. Eric, I'm going to start with you from Siemens. North America is your biggest market, even though you're an international company. Some people have projected that smart cities could be a $1.5 trillion opportunity in the years to come. How do you guys see it? What's the opportunity, and where are you focusing to make an impact and make money?
Well, we have a large cities group that works across all of our businesses, but about 3 or 4 years ago, we did something called a Green Cities Index, where we worked with 26 cities in the US, but also over 100 cities worldwide, and took a look at things like carbon, energy, waste, water, public transportation, green spaces, all kinds of factors to kind of see how were cities doing and what were the best practices. San Francisco, by the way, was ranked the #1 city in the US. We came back about a year or so ago and said to cities, do you want to redo this? And they said, well, we like a lot of it, but really we want to focus on carbon. And a lot of cities are throwing out things like 50% reduction by 2030 or 80% reduction by 2050. And so we really worked on building a city tool that has over 60 technologies in it. And it's got the cost, and you put in data for each of the cities. Takes quite a bit of data to load it. But once you get it in there, you can evaluate all these technologies, because cities have a limited budget. And I think some really amazing things are coming out. We've done cities like Minnesota, San Francisco, I think Phoenix is in there now, Boston, Washington, D.C. in the US, and a bunch in Europe. And some interesting things, for example, in cities like Minnesota and Minneapolis, electric vehicles have a much bigger impact than electric rail, which isn't necessarily a good thing for Siemens, but it's an interesting finding. Other cities, light rail pays out better than converting more and more electric vehicles, things like that. Street lighting, for example, doesn't have as big a bang, LEDs, as people would think for the money. Other things like—
in terms of reducing greenhouse
right.
gas.
I mean, number one thing is building automation for commercial and industrial, and home automation. Those two things, managing energy demand, are by far and away the biggest players. And then electric vehicles turn out well. And there's 60 or 70 technologies in there. So it's pretty interesting, some of the findings. Cities have been spending money on some things that when you take a look at it, this isn't really where the big bang's going to come from. I can spend my money more wisely. So,
Governor Bill Ritter, you're now doing a lot of research on policy as it applies to all these issues. Are cities really the engine now of innovation, and why? Why can't federal governments or states that you've obviously been involved in be the driver of change?
I think it's a mix between cities and states. I think there are a lot of places where at the state level there's still a big push. Things are happening. But I do think, and we were talking backstage, that cities are a really important part of this. And from my perspective, right, I'm kind of a politician perspective. My orientation's around that. Mayors are just far less political in terms of partisan politics. They're still political animals. They want to do things that show that they're cutting edge with respect to leading a city. But city councils and mayors are not wrapped around the axles on partisan politics like you see at the United States Congress. And there's not a lot of people who are mayors who are looking at the issues like climate change and think, well, this doesn't exist, or I've got to respect some party platform, and so I'm going to hold back on it. It's actually the opposite. And so you also—
But it is ironic, right? Because climate change is a global issue. Why are we leaving it to mayors to be the kind of catalyst of change?
Well, and it's not I don't think we're only leaving it to mayors. I do think we got to give states some credit for doing some really important things. Things like renewable energy standards, energy efficiency resource standards in the past have been very important. Net energy metering, those kinds of things. There's a lot of regulation that happens at the state level, and so states have a big part of it. But municipalities, first of all, many of them have their own utility, and that's big. They have the ability to really dictate what happens because they operate their own utility. If you look at San Antonio and Austin, they're in a state that is pretty slow moving at the state level on clean energy policy, but boy, they're both moving it in a big way because of their own utility. Even where they don't have their own utility, municipalities have such a big part of the load that they can leverage a utility. So take Xcel Energy in Denver, public service company in Colorado. Denver is 20% of their load, just Denver proper, not the entire metro area. Denver proper is 20% of their load, and they have a clean energy plan now and a climate plan that has to be part of Xcel's resource planning. When they go before the PUC, they say, we have to have this for Denver because they're such a big part of the load, and this is what they're demanding from us.
Interesting stuff. Glenn, you've been so involved in the evolution of the smartphone and mobile technology. Great quote I read that our cities are rapidly becoming open-air computers.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true, and how much of this is really going to be connected to mobile technology and computing?
Well, I think what was just said, this is all about technology. You know, our job, AT&T views our job is to go be the best partner we can with the city and the state, and go look at how we use mobile technology to really make it a better place to live, as well as the sustainability side. And when you think about connecting everything, you think about having the ability to look at everything from lighting to transportation to water to all the different things we talked about. AT&T's been in the IoT business for over 8 years. We lead the world as far as we have 28 connected million things on our network today. We lead in automotive, we lead in home. All that's got to come together to make a smart city work. And to do the things that these mayors and governors and others want to do, it's going to take companies like ourselves partnering with them to go prove out that whether they have funds or not, we may even be willing to fund some things because you can prove out that they all long term can actually save money while reducing carbon, while making it a better place. A simple example in Atlanta, we work with Mayor Reed to go do a trial on their water systems. And we simply, with a partner like Ericsson, put a simple sensor inside of their water systems where we can see leaks. And what we learned is that in some cities in the United States, half of their water leaks, billions of gallons of water. We can see that instantly. So when you start thinking about connecting these things, connecting garbage trucks, sounds kind of interesting, right? We're connecting garbage cans. We got asked a simple question by a waste management company. All I want to know is where the garbage can is and how full it is. Then I can do my routing differently and make it more efficient. Those are the kind of simple things. Another quick one, vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communication. Think about your commute being 50% shorter. Think about every morning before you even walk into your car, you have the ability, your smartphone works with your car, works with your home, works with the city, and gives you the right route based upon whether there's traffic, whether there's an accident, et cetera, to reduce those driving. And then I can go on and on. But the last
Let me actually ask you one question about that. So we're, already we all know we've hit this tipping point where more than half of humanity is living in big cities.
Yes.
And by 2050, that's projected to go to at least 70%. Mm-hmm. Is there any possibility that some of the developments we've been talking about here in terms of new mobility models, autonomous vehicles, might actually reverse urbanization and cause people to live in a more distributed fashion? Or are we really headed down the urban path?
I think we're headed down the urban path. I think we have to plan and do the things we're talking about as we are going down that path. The conversation we have backstage is, well, if you have autonomous vehicles, and maybe people could live further out and be comfortable. And I think, 25 years from now, we might be having that conversation. But I think if you think about urban today and you talk about some of the big changes, think about Uber. I mean, Uber is there because of wireless devices, apps, and the cloud. I mean, that's why it's there, and that's why they're having the success that they're having. And this is all about enabling, using wireless technologies to enable everything and make it smarter and give you the ability to see real-time data on about anything, which allows you, again, to do some of the things we're talking about.
I think, Andrew, some cities around the world, London would be a good example, are now optimizing around cars, buses, and trains.
Correct.
Right, and there's software being used, and there actually is, charging people going into the city now. So but one of the things you have to have is you have to have options. You have to have cities where you can make a choice between taking a car, taking a bus, or taking a train, or even taking a higher speed train. I think we would have to develop more and more, if we really want mobility to play a much bigger role in people living further out, whether that's a good thing or not. I think you need to build in more options. We have some cities that have some optionality in the U.S., but we're well behind Europe in terms of having a lot of that optionality. Once you do that, I think the congestion pricing, for example, in London is reduced congestion by 20 to 25%. It's reduced commute times by 15 to 20 minutes for the
So
average.
why don't we have congestion pricing in the U.S. then?
I think there's been quite a bit of backlash in London about that, and the question is, is it a regressive tax on some people who have to drive to work and things like that? I mean, there's a lot of policy issues that need to be worked out around it. And there's, clearly it sends the right signals, and people do adapt to the change. But there are no big cities in the U.S. who have that kind of a model in place. Although I think with the technology out there, it's very doable. Right?
Yeah, I just add one that I totally agree, and I add one other thing. We have to go test and trial and prove some of these things. There's lots of great slideware that says, well, if you have connected cars and you connect every street light, and we have the vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure, traffic will be reduced by 25%. You got to go prove it, right? You can't just walk into a governor or a mayor and say, hey, trust me, let's go spend all this money. So that's one of the things we're doing right now, is working with multiple cities, some big ones, Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, and we're going to go prove these things out with our partners. We have a smart cities platform that we have a bunch of partners that are in with us, and the whole idea is let's go prove it works, and then once you've proven it, now you can go look at other cities to help them.
Can any one big company dominate in this area? Is this going to be, like Apple and Google, or going to need a network of collaborators? Because I think both of you are partnering with a lot of other folks, sometimes competitors, right?
Absolutely, you have to,
Yeah.
Okay. Governor Ritter, tell us about the social implications of this. I mean, we hear a lot about the digital divide. How does that play into what's happening in smart cities, and how do we make sure that everyone gets to participate in the benefits?
So it's your question, are we heading further toward urbanization? At some point we're going to reverse out of that. And I think the shared economy is very much an urban economy. And it feels to me, if I gauge sort of what's happened around the country, particularly with cities, that cities are trying to figure out how to ensure that people who live there are part of the shared economy. There are people that won't move into a city because of the traffic. So you have to solve for that traffic problem in order to be able to attract employers, to be able to attract a certain demographic, younger people. You have to figure out the housing part of it. Housing's a big issue, and technology helps with respect to all of that. We've seen in Colorado, Boulder try and get a divorce from Xcel Energy just for this reason, because they don't think the utility is doing enough to allow them to be attractive to the kind of people that they want to bring to Boulder, Colorado. They want to be 100% clean energy, and they don't think Xcel's there. And so they're trying to undo their entire franchise, in part because they want to remain competitive as this cutting-edge city. And again, if you look at Clean Edge today, just published their leadership list for metros and states, and you look at the cities, this is the big cities that are on this, these are all cities that are competing one with another over who can really have sort of that leadership edge. San Francisco's been there, but then you look at the next 9, they're competing. 4 of them are here in California, of the cities that are sort of the big cities that are clean, and they're all still trying to figure out how they thrive in the 21st century.
Well, I'd like folks to think about questions. I'm going to take questions after one more I have. Eric, on the international front, we hear a lot about, how we haven't invested enough in our infrastructure. Vice President Biden famously went to New York at LaGuardia Airport and said this is like third world infrastructure. I heard the governor of New York saying the other day that if you go into Penn Station, you'd think you were, 100 years ago. Are we prioritizing investment in our smart cities enough relative to what other countries in Asia and elsewhere are doing?
No, I think this is actually Infrastructure Week this week, right? And there's a lot of discussions going on around the country. And I think when we talk about infrastructure, where we're behind, it's not just roads and bridges. I think, 25, 30 years ago, companies from around the world used to come to the U.S. and say, this is the greatest infrastructure on earth. And that's just not true anymore, right? I mean, a lot of countries have passed us by, our ports, our airports, our railroads. I mean, there's a lot, the grid, all need to be upgraded. I think if you take a look at the kinds of things we're talking about here, I think because of the focus on carbon reduction in Europe and the program that they've had in place, I think they're ahead of us in many of these areas already. Maybe not so much in the connected part, but certainly in the push to reduce carbon. Just easy things like public transportation, for example, Europe is well ahead of the US. So we have a lot of catching up to do to upgrade the infrastructure. I mean, if you don't have things, it's hard to have an internet of things. It's hard to connect things you don't have, right? So first we got to get some of the things, and we got to get more modern things, and then connecting them is going to add value. But it's about the technology, it's about understanding the domain, and then it's understanding what you can do with smart technology. And so we can't jump to the third one without thinking about, what do we need to do with the first two.
The National Renewable Energy Laboratory has a study that says we could get to 80% penetration on renewables if we would invest in the grid. The technology is presently there.
Yep.
There's a lot of other things that they make no assumptions about new technology, but they said by 2050 you could get to 80% renewable penetration if we would just think about just the grid.
Yeah, and I'll just say this, and I agree. I would throw out that the U.S. is actually ahead when it comes to wireless technologies, right? We've invested ahead of everybody else. So today, when you look at the networks, the billions of dollars that have been spent in the United States, we're well ahead in whether it's 4G customers and every other aspect of the wireless business. So we have that infrastructure built. And to the point made, now we've got to go figure out how do we help when you think about infrastructure in a city, and how do we connect it and make it better as they find the funds to actually go invest. But bottom line is, this is going to take the whole ecosystem. It's going to take everybody holding hands to figure out how do we all invest and how do we all get this, and again, proving out those models that make business sense for a city and business sense for a Siemens or for an AT&T.
So our digital infrastructure might be better than our physical infrastructure, and that's probably because we started 50 or 100 years building out our buildings, our infrastructure.
I'd say this. I mean, the marketplace in the United States is the four big carriers have invested. I mean, AT&T have invested more than any other company in America the last 4 years, period, not just telco. Because again, it's about putting the infrastructure in so that we have the resource to grow, and we've grown. So you have that as a wonderful, wonderful tool in the United States. And now, as was said very well, you've got governors and mayors taking notice that they have work they've got to go do to make their cities better.
All right, let's get some questions from the audience. Anyone have questions? We have folks with mics out there. Yes, right over here, this mic person. Thank you.
Hey, Adam Appel, Solar City, Andrew.
Hey.
Quick question. So we talked about energy, connectivity, transportation. How about the cities that maybe aren't ahead, like San Francisco, New York? Where do they start? You guys talked about a lot of things, but where do those cities that are maybe a little bit behind even get started?
Good question.
I mean, I'm glad I think how we're starting with cities is we're sitting down with the leaders of that city, the CIOs of that city, and really asking what are their major issues. What's the feedback they're getting from the public of where they are, whether it's traffic, whether it's water, and whatever that case may be. And we want to go in and be the best partner in the world and sit down and say, how can we help you? How can we test and trial? The one thing that when you started talking about smart cities 4 or 5 years ago, people wanted to boil the ocean. You can't do that. You have to pick use cases, prove those use cases out, and then go from there. Because reality is these cities don't have money just laying around. Right? They got to find things that they can put into invest knowing that they get a return, and that's the key element. So we're actually having just sit-down conversations with many cities right now in the U.S. and around the world saying, how do we help you? And then we obviously bring in the tools, the partners to say, here are the potential options you have.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons we developed the city performance tool, to be able to take a look at all of these. Cities do have a limited budget. Where are you going to get the biggest bang, and what are your real objectives? For example, in New York, we're working with the Metro there. They want to get more capacity. Well, adding new lines is very, very, very expensive. But with the right train control, digital train control technology, you can bring the cars in and out at a much faster pace with less time between trains. And so they can increase capacity by, I think, 20% just by using digital train control, right? Those are the kinds of things. Where do you really want to focus? Where are you going to get a big bang for your buck? That's a huge bang in New York to be able to increase, capacity on a line by 20% just by putting in digital train control as opposed to having to build new train lines.
Yeah. Can I give one more example? Obviously, to your question, the issue in Flint obviously has a lot of folks in government very nervous. The test I talked about not only can detect a water leak, but the filter and the device, for lack of a better term, we're putting inside of an old infrastructure also can tell you the quality of the water. So you think there's a couple of folks out there interested in that. Everybody is now because of what happened there. And instantly they would know by minute, right, real time, leaks, quality, et cetera, of that water. That's pretty important. And
well, it shows you that smart cities are not just about gadgets. It's really about quality of life and...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Former mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and the CEO of the Advanced Energy Economy. For all the panel members, but particularly Eric, you and Glenn, What are the policy drivers that you think will help move us to this smart city market faster?
You're the policy guy.
Oh, but
See, he purposely didn't want to ask
You're
Governor
going to
Ritter
the former
that.
governor.
He's a great friend of mine, but we talk about this all the time. He knows my answer. So I think, first of all, don't just pay attention to the cities. One of the biggest policy drivers that have moved cities have been state policies. And I mentioned before some of them, but there's a variety of really important things. You know, if a state at the state level makes it possible to build community solar, then cities and municipalities that have their own utilities can take advantage of that. There are just a variety of policies. We just published 38 clean energy policies that we look at in each of the 50 states. And you can look at that and just say, what would drive the city the most? Building codes drive city policy in a really big way, sort of on the clean energy side. So getting cities to revamp and update their building codes is a really big factor as well.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that?
Look, I'm not going to debate with him, but I think policy is very important. We follow it. We have people in every state. I think what's more important is making people's lives better. I think what's more important is us using technology to make it better. And there's certain policies that are going to help us go faster. I actually think we can go very fast with or without policies.
So let's wrap. I'm going to ask each of you in 30 seconds, if you were a mayor of a city, what would be the first thing you'd do to get us on the road to a smarter city?
Yeah, I think I would start by getting, not only getting the support of the community, but getting business and the city working more closely together to understand what are the real issues we're dealing with, what is it going to cost, and what are the options we have. And I think that doesn't occur enough at the right levels.
Great.
So it's like that myth busting. There are just too many myths out there about the costs of trying to electrify a city or to go clean or whatever term you want to use. Just educate people about how you tie environmental issues, economic issues, and what we call equity issues all together so that you actually can give them a vision for getting there without having to pay large sums of money for it.
Yeah, I think all I'd add is this. I think we're so new, and this is such a young discussion, that if I was a mayor, and I'll pick on Mayor Reed in Atlanta, Mayor Reed came out and said, look, if we do this right, and I have the smartest city, I'm going to have the best city to live. I'm going to have a much easier time bringing companies in and growing economic development, and I'm going to make it a better place to live. And so he's all about right now about learning. How do we learn? How do we learn as fast as we can? And he's challenged us, companies that are working with him, to help him. And that's exactly what I would do.